Now, in terms of worries that Australians have, being able to keep their own home right now because of what's happening when it comes to interest rates and the overall economy, it'd have to be up there as one of the biggest. Certainly I know that lots of my mates, regardless of how much their house is worth, have all noticed, well and truly, that interest rates have gone up a dozen times since Anthony Albanese became the Prime Minister and Jim Chalmers became the great passenger and observer of the Australian economy. And there are a lot of people that are doing it tough because of those repayments. We learned today that 1 million Victorian households are found to be in mortgage or rent stress. This means that you are paying way more for rent or paying off your house than you should be. Generally speaking, it should only be about a third of your wage. Anything above that, certainly once you start getting to a half or even more than that, which again, some of my mates have ended up in that scenario, well, Michelle Bullock is now saying that the people who are in mortgage stress, the people who are finding it difficult to pay off their house at the moment because of those high interest rates that are high because of, in part, the actions of the federal government, well, she's got a blunt message. There's a chance they'll keep going up. And if you are in that sort of mortgage stress, don't wait for them to come down. It might be time to sell the house you're living in. What a frightening prospect, but have a look.
For owner-occupiers with variable rate loans, which is a subset of all borrowers, we estimate that around 5% are in a particularly challenging situation. Now, although this group is fairly small overall, those in it have to make some quite painful adjustments to avoid falling behind on their mortgage repayments. This includes things like cutting back on their spending to the more essential items, trading down to lower quality goods and services, dipping into their savings or working extra hours. And some may ultimately have to make the very difficult choice to sell their home.
Now, of course, Jim Chalmers will say this is great because it's her delivering the bad message, but of course it's his bad economy. Take your pick. The amount that we export versus the amount that we import, which is now in the wrong spot. The value of the Australian dollar, which is in the wrong spot. The 6 quarters in a row of a per capita recession, which is the wrong spot for the best part of 18 months, and an economy in terms of growth that is like an idling car that, because it's badly tuned, slightly rolls forward at the lights. Again, not the position that other countries like the United States or the United Kingdom are in, let alone places like Canada or Japan. So if anyone thinks that rates are about to be cut anytime soon, it of course would be the Treasurer and the Prime Minister. The assumption is that the 13th interest rate rise would become what is politically difficult for the government, but my argument and my understanding, my lived experience, your lived experience, is that the interest rate python, which has been squeezing people to Ribena purple, was bad at 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6 interest rate rises. But guess what? There may be a chance of another interest rate rise. That 13th that the press gallery say is going to be a problem when the rest of us in the real world have known that there's been a problem way longer than the 13th. Here again is Michelle Bullock talking about the reality that inflation in Australia should be between 2 and 3%. It is currently closer to 4% than it is 3%, meaning rates up again, maybe.
So the board's message following its meeting only a few weeks ago was that it's premature to be thinking about rate cuts.
And when does inflation go back to between 2 and 3%, the agreed position of both federal government and Reserve Bank, regardless of all of the other garbage? Well, this long is how you're going to have to wait, and how long we're all still going to be paying more for what we were already paying more for last year and already paying almost double more than 2 years ago.
Now, in our central August forecast, underlying inflation is expected to be back in the target range by the end of next year and to approach the midpoint in 2026.
Now, to further underline my point about how serious this situation is and how beyond the 13th will be the problem and why the 12th, the 11th, the 10th, all of those are the problem, why the 5% of people who may well be right in the hole will have to sell their house. Now, remember, selling your house, if it's worth an awful lot of money and you've got money left over, may well open up the opportunity of buying another house somewhere else. But for many people, It won't result in either enough money, if you're borrowed to the hilt, to be able to have enough of a deposit, let alone to qualify for another home loan somewhere else. So then you start talking about the rental market. Well, the rental market, of course, now is less than 1% of all available rental properties actually being available in the capital cities and in regional areas too. As I've often pointed out, an example of this, which is that, say, Ipswich, beautiful Ipswich, west of Brisbane. It's still a commute if you've got to go into Brizzy, but it's close enough if you want to go for a drive, the best part of, 40 minutes. More than 120 people turn up to rental inspections there to look for one property. The number's way bigger in Sydney, Melbourne and central Brisbane, let alone what's going on right now in Adelaide, Perth and Hobart. So today we got some information from the University of Technology in Sydney, UTS, very left-wing university. Just check out their media program, which is essentially 3 years of learning why to hate Sky News. But anyway, they did a research project talking about people who are in the band where it is hard to pay off your house, hard to pay rent. Have a look at this. In the past 2 years, 70% of people say that they have experienced a rent increase. That is up by 7% compared to this time last year. 19% said that their lease had been terminated or not renewed. That's up 6%. The people who had to move house because the house they were in was too expensive, so therefore they moved to a cheaper one, is up 4% in 12 months to 18%. 16% of people had to move in with their family, and people who experienced homelessness was 7% of those that they had talked to. Australia has more homeless people today than it did at the census, and at the census it was the biggest number we had ever had. That was in 2021. Meantime, about the cost of housing, people who could not make at least one payment, that being a payment for your mortgage or your rent. 65% of people that they had spoken to, up 6% in the past 3 years. Could not pay the utility bill on time, half. That's up 9%. Could not afford to travel for essential reasons, 44%, up 7%. Could not make a minimum payment on a credit card, 37%. And could not pay mortgage or rent on time, 35%. This is why I talk about cost of living every night. I talk about it every night because it is a problem. It is a genuine source of concern for a huge amount of people around Australia. The government wants to pretend nothing to see here, it's all international factors, bull dust. One more here. Where do people go for help when they're in these sorts of financial straits? They sought the financial assistance of a family member or a friend, 46% of people, up 7%. They use those buy now, pay later things for essential goods like food, 41%. People who pawned or sold something off because they needed the cash now is up almost 10%, 39% of people in the past couple of years.